Thank you, folks, and thank you, all of you. My idea of a good time is to be together with people who don't have time to unhook and be together, who are willing to come together with no agenda and see what shows up. So this is that in spades. And of course, just listening to the speakers, equal combinations of humility and inspiration. So I stand up here humbled and inspired by all of you. So I'm going to share a little of my story. I'm following directions. They ask those of us speaking to step out of our comfort zone and not do our regular shtick. So hopefully I will do that, and hopefully this will have some value for you. I'm going to share a little bit about my story, which I don't usually do. Basically, I'm going to talk about sort of a current reality with what I've uncovered and what I'm doing, for those of you who may not be familiar with my stuff. And by the way, I'm curious, because it's been delightful to run across people who've run across my stuff here, serendipitously for us to connect. How many of you have run across my material, either in my books or seminars or any of the Getting Things Done material? How many of you? Oh, wow, okay, so cool. For the rest of you, that's not a requirement to listen to what I'm going to talk about. As a matter of fact, those people who just raised their hand, it takes about 2 years to get this, if you're really good. I'm going to give you a sense of what this is that has wound up being built kind of around me, and something that I didn't really make up. I just recognized and synthesized and created a lexicon about that made it apparently very useful. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that happened, a little bit about my story, and maybe that will be at least inspiring or instructive or interesting, or at least a way to kill 10 of these minutes, about how I got here. There's a lot behind this in terms of my own story. And then a little bit about what excites me about this. So there's some now and some kind of how and hopefully some wow. And then I'm going to have a little do to share with you, and then a big do, for myself and everybody else as well. So let's talk a little bit about, or I'll share a little bit about what's current reality. How many of you recognize this current reality? Any of you got a lot more to do than you have time, resources to do, and the opportunities are overwhelming out there. Yeah, it's huge. By the way, people talk oftentimes about information overload. That's not the issue. If it was, you'd walk into a library and die. First time you connected to the web, you'd blow up. As a matter of fact, the most relaxing environment in the world is the most information-rich environment in the world. It's all around. It's called nature. Matter of fact, you really want to stress out and go nuts. Sensory deprivation is a fast way to do that. It's not really information overload. It's that inside of that is information that is potentially meaningful, but we don't know yet exactly what that meaning is, nor have we been able to calibrate it against all the other things we consider meaningful and have made commitments about. And if you haven't handled that very well, there's a real good chance it feels and looks like that. There is another approach, and I use an image from the martial arts because I had a black belt in karate many years ago. Mind like water, grasshopper, sort of beginner's mind idea. Is there a way to somehow thread through all that potential meaning and overwhelming set of commitments and stuff to do and still have clear space? So years ago, I discovered what I refer to now as the strategic value of clear space. I worked one-on-one with some of the best and brightest and busiest people on the planet, coaching and working with their implementation of this methodology that I'm sort of uncovered. And every one of them, when it really comes down to it, the one thing they'd give a significant body part for is more psychic space. To do the kind of thinking, to be as creative, to be as innovative as they think they feel like they should. And it's not time and physical space. Those are critical components, but you can have 2 hours of free time and lots of room and still play solitaire on your computer because you're stressed out. It's really the psychic space. Once you have psychic space, in 3 minutes in an elevator, you can have an idea that'll turn you on. So it's really, how do I create that psychic space amidst all of that? Now that kind of has a little bit of a passive idea. I use another image, which I call knowledge worker ninja. What are the two elements this thing is representing? The two elements that in my years of working with this material, I found, ultimately the simplicity on the other side of complexity comes down to two things. And it's the two things that actually represented, and I think you'll see, I can run the slide back after you see this, but in my 65 years of, experience, I think it comes down to two things. If you had enough of a sense of I've got things under control and I'm focused appropriately in terms of my attention and my resources, no problems. Every single thing you think about in terms of personal organization, time management, prioritization, any of those kinds of issues could all be wrapped together. There is some improvement opportunity about having things more under control or more appropriately focused. Come on, any of you ever been in a situation where you said, wait a minute, we need to get organized and get focused? That's actually accurate. There's two admonitions there, not one. There's two. Organize is not the best term. Now, when I say control, I don't mean control like control your kids, control your boss, control the world. Good luck. I'm talking about having things under control like a boat or a conversation or a project or your desk or your head. So that's what I mean by those two things. And in all of my years and a lot of the research of what I've found is how do we get back to those in case you lose them? And by the way, if you're not losing one or both of those at least a half a dozen times a day, you're stale. I guarantee you, I listened to Maggie this morning, I guarantee you she threw herself way out of control, didn't know what the hell she was going to do as soon as she put on that pack and left. Same is true for all of us. If you're being creative, if you're stepping out, if you're sort of breaking your bounds, you're of necessity are going to throw things out of control, and you're going to have to keep rethinking and refocusing on what's the right focus right now. What I found was, in case you lose these, how do I get things back under control if they're out? And how do I get things back on focus in case it's fuzzy? And I got it down as simple as I could get it. Basically, of those two things, there's 5 things you need to do to get anything under control, and that's your kitchen or your country, or anything in between. And there's 6 conversations, or let's say inventories of your commitments that need to be clarified for you to feel really comfortable that sitting here listening to me is exactly what you need to be doing on the planet right now. Couldn't get it any simpler than these. I tried because I am Mr. Lazy. I tried to get things as simple as possible, but I couldn't get it any simpler. By the way, I'm just sharing with you the secret sauce that's the sort of end result of a lot of years of testing this stuff out in a lot of places. And then I'll tell you kind of how I got there. So there's a lot more detail to fill in about all this, but I'll give you the high-level view of the answers here. How do you get stuff under control? There are actually 5 things you need to do. You need to make sure you've captured things that are out of control or that are not on cruise control. That is, I now need to make sure I've collected stuff. How many of you, I'm curious, have ever felt yourself somewhat out of control and a little confused, and you sat down and you made a list and you felt at least a little bit better, more focused and in control? Right. By the way, if you'd reverse engineered how come that happened, you'd never keep anything in your head the rest of your life. Think about it. Nothing changed in your world except one very critical thing. How you were engaged with your world is what you changed. And you did it by one simple thing that the psychologists now call distributed cognition. I did a workshop one time and I had a woman come and she said, oh, David, do you know what you're talking about? I said, what am I talking about? She said, distributed cognition. I said, you mean write it down? She said, well, that's another way to say it. By the way, you know what they call these things? Cognitive artifacts. Okay. Well, we laughed, but we've only seen the beginning of understanding how the mind doesn't have one. And your mind is for having ideas, but not for holding them. So just the idea to begin with, I've got to identify, capture, collect, gather together the stuff that is not on cruise control. Then you have a lot of people who make lists, but they don't go through stage 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they're still out of control. They're just list makers. They got lists stuck all over everywhere. But oftentimes, I'm sitting down working with a client, and one of the things I'll see on their list is something like, mom. And I go, good. Historical data, you probably had one. Why is mom on your list? It's her birthday's coming. Oh, okay. Oh, now something's not on cruise control. We've now captured mom's birthday. What you've got to do is move to stage 2. You better clarify exactly what that means and why you have attention on it. So the second stage is I need to clarify. And that's pretty simple, actually. The way to clarify is first question, look, you going to do anything about mom's birthday? There are 2 optional answers. Yes. No. This is deep, folks. Stick with me. I'll bet every one of you, though, has all kinds of stuff out there that you haven't made that distinction about whether you've got a commitment to actually do something about it or not. So the first distinction to clarify is, look, is this really something you're committed to do something about? And if no, you still have to decide, is it trash or is it just information to store as reference? Or is it something I might want to think about later on or reassess later on? Those are three subsets of no action now. But if there is action required, no, Mom, we're going to do something. Great, what are you going to do? And the two key questions at the clarification stage here is, what outcome are you committed to finish about this? And what's the action step required to kickstart moving toward it? Action and outcome is the zeros and ones of any consulting, of anything. We've heard a lot of those two words talked around in here for the last day. Those are big ones. What does sustainable look like when you've kept your commitment about that? I heard that yesterday. What's the very next action step that you need to take if you are now committed to get to whatever that final picture is? And as simple as those questions are, most people avoid those decisions. Most people make those decisions when things blow up instead of when they show up. So to get things under control, first of all, what's out of control? What am I committed to do about it, if anything? What's the action step that needs to take? Quite frankly, folks, the way you get things done is you need to know what done means and what doing looks like and where it happens. And interestingly enough, those are questions people avoid like the plague about all kinds of stuff. Mom. Give Mom birthday party. Great, now you got a project. Boom. What's the next step? I should call my sister and see. Yeah, all right, now I got a call to make and now I got a project to finish. Dude, you're on. And you wouldn't believe how much money they pay me to walk very cool, sophisticated, savvy, professional, successful people through that thought process. I've yet to work with a C-level, director-level person who is not the bottleneck for at least 6 key initiatives simply because they're avoiding that clarification question. The way it is. Now, once you make those decisions, you'll still be out of control unless you organize the results of those things in appropriate places you trust you will reflect upon regularly and then engage with on some regular basis. So those are the 5 stages. And by the way, I didn't make this up. I just watched how it really works when we work it. And each one of those stages, by the way, has its own best practices and its own tools. They're very different things. It's not just go get organized. No. A lot of people, their organization is just rearranging incomplete piles of still unclear things. That's why planners don't work. That's why most organizational systems don't work, is because the contents in there are inappropriate or incomplete or both. And by the way, once you do all that, you'll find you got a lot of stuff to do. Most of us in this room have between 30 and 100 projects and over 150 next actions right now if you were to really identify the things tugging on your psyche and clarify them and organize the results of that thinking appropriately. So it's a big inventory. How do you make the decisions, especially when you reflect on then how to engage with your 16 phone calls and your 43 projects and what to do about them next? That's where you have to go into, okay, how do I then decide what's the right thing to do about all that? And I couldn't get it any simpler than these 6 conversations. I'll go top down hierarchically. Usually when we work with people, we go bottom up. Simply because that's where most people, their psyche is tied up around. If I ask most of you right now to say, jot down the top 10, how many of you have something on your mind, by the way, besides this? Anybody got anything on your mind? Now, if I ask you to just do that core dump, write it all down, there are not going to be a whole lot of you that in the first 6 or 8 things are going to write fulfill destiny as human spirit on planet. But that is your only project, I'm sorry. Why didn't you write that down? You wrote down, oh, babysitter, oh, cat food. Oh, I understand. Tires on my car. Yeah, I got it. See, what's different about my approach is I start with where people are, not with where you should be. Because if you can't handle and get under control where you are and get it focused right, where you should be is like spitting in the wind. But once you get now nailed, woo, then hang on. You can put content into your system at any level. So anyway, so there's a top level. Let's say top level is basic intentionality and basic rules of engagement. So if you're deciding your priorities, like what's the purpose of the do, right? What's the purpose of the do lectures? And by the way, what are our rules of engagement? Anything is off of those, you're out of alignment. So this is ultimate intentionality, by the way, which is very different than good intentions. There's intention and good intentions, very different things. Now, once you have the intent, if you knew your life purpose, yeah, well, how much is that going to help you decide which email to write first? A little bit. You're probably going to need to come down to vision. What would my purpose successfully fulfilled look like out there in the world? 5-year vision, lifestyle, career. Where do you want to be? What would it look like? We've heard a lot of vision stuff in here. Ooh, wow, God, that's Yes. Is that going to help you decide which email to write first? A little bit more, but then you're probably going to need to get down to what I call the 30,000 level, which is goals, or what do you need to accomplish within the next 11 months? I love Maggie. She scaled it down. Go, look, that's too big. That's vision, but I need to bring it down to probably within the next 12 months we can do this, or 18 months, or 24. So you're probably going to need to chunk down some chunkable pieces on that. And then there's an area that I call the 20,000 level areas of responsibility. Those are the 4 to 7 things you're required to maintain in terms of your professional world. Staff development, strategic planning, project design, whatever. What's your job? What are the hats you wear in your life? Health, relationships. All those things we need to maintain. You ate lunch. You just dealt 20,000. They deal with the body. Relationships. All that stuff. And those oftentimes take a lot of your day. Is what do you need to maintain at a certain level of standard? And then out of all that, you've got projects, which I call the 10,000 level. Those are all the things you need to finish. How about any of this that are unfinished? Anything you can finish within a year that takes more than one step, you better identify it as a project. Get tires on my car, hire the assistant, launch the ad campaign, whatever those are. And again, most people have 40, 50, 60, 70 of those. And actions would be, okay, now I got something to do. Here's an email to send. Here's stuff to buy at the hardware store. Here's stuff to talk to my boss about. Here's stuff to talk to my teenager about. And that's the action level. Couldn't get it any simpler than that. Any one of those is dropped out where your inventory of your commitments at those levels is unclear or incomplete. It's almost impossible to trust that sitting here listening to me is exactly what you need to be doing on the planet. I couldn't get it any simpler. So those 6 conversations, those are if you're lost focus, okay, which of these conversations do you need to have with your staff right now or your family? Do you need to talk about the vision of success 5 years from now, or do you need to figure out, okay, who's handling the vacation scheduling? Very different conversations, but equally important to know that you're doing the right thing. Few challenging, provocative things, some of my favorite thoughts du jour, I'll just share them with you, and that's just kind of food for thought. There's an inverse relationship between on your mind and getting done. So you can pretty much bet if something's bugging you, it's hung up and you're the bottleneck. If this is true, the most productive people with the emptiest heads. No, come on, folks. It's possible to be totally buried and have absolutely nothing on your mind. I'm demonstrating that. Maybe that's evident. There ain't much going on up here. Except this. The only reason that the other stuff is not in here is because I collected, processed, organized, reviewed, looked at all that stuff and said, you're it. I may have made a bad call. I don't know. We'll find out. But as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing else that my psyche needs to be engaged with in that way, other than the clear space of whatever I'm doing. If you don't pay appropriate attention to what has your attention, it'll take more of your attention than it deserves. Cat food better pop into your head once. Look, once you start to catch this, there's no reason to have a thought more than once unless you like the thought. I just said food for thought. By the way, once you pay attention to what has your attention, you'll find out what really has your attention. Once you handle cat food, once you handle the babysitter, once you handle tires on your car, then you start to go, oh, wait a minute. What I'm really doing is. And by the way, once you handle that, then you go, oh, wait a minute. What I'm really doing is. And we've heard a lot of that migration over the last day with people. And they're saying, once they started to pay it, God, I need to handle this. Then they handle that, whoo, suddenly this bigger game starts out. If you tried to start with a big game, you'd blow up. So, what does that look like in terms of my business? What happened was with that, and that's a simplified version of it, but quite frankly, doesn't get much more complicated than those conversations that I just gave you a quick freeze-dried version of, in terms of how we work with people and how you can improve a situation. What happened was I wound up writing 3 books about all that. My first one is now in Getting Things Done is now in 30 languages, spreading around the world. The business that got created around that, I don't want to sound like an American tooting their horn, but I am. So here I am, American. To me, it was just bemusing. People say, David, what do you think about all the success of what's happened there? I go, well, it's just interesting to me. It depends on what side of the bed I get up in the morning. When I get up on the ta-da side of the bed, I'm going, only 2 million people have read that book. God, there's 6 billion people on the planet. Let's get busy. The other days I wake up and go, I'm surprised anybody gets this. And they're paying me to do this. Wow. So I now have a small business. There are about 50 of us. We do have a whole portfolio of things we've built around this set of intellectual property kinds of things or methodologies. And it's just a thought process. That it's not tools or gear or anything like that. It's just this way of thinking, and how do we translate that? And basically, we're in the education business for the most part. Our core business is taking this, say, how do we, what I just gave you a short version, how do we get that education into ripe places that can use this, that need more control and more perspective and the tools to make that happen? And so the large corporate training world and market happens to be the richest, ripest places for this methodology, so that we're in that deeply. So we do instructor-led training. We do now train the trainer stuff. We have an e-learning version of this thing that we've developed. And 50 people in the company doing this. We have an online GTD Connect. We have public seminars around this stuff, and several different products and things that we do around this. It's still just kind of struggling with that, and we have a burgeoning consulting practice because now we've done work in 40% of the Fortune 100 companies with this stuff. But just 3 weeks ago, I was in Silicon Valley talking to 3 companies, you'd all know them very well, that are now looking at how do we get this kind of thought process embedded in our culture, because they're now maturing to the place where they can't just be high flyers anymore. They have to start to pay attention to their productivity. And the buzz that's happening, to me, it's kind of bemusing about that too. I have 1.3 million Twitter followers right now, and the buzz seems to keep growing. There are at last count, over 300 software applications that have now been written purporting to support the GTD model. Not ours, just other people out there going, ooh, lists. We know how to do lists. Any of you Mac users using OmniFocus or things, those are all built on this model. So that's kind of what the now is. How did I get there? Let me... I have always been fascinated, and I didn't realize this until many, many, many years later of my 65. I've always been fascinated by the relationship of the invisible to the visible. Because I figured if you somehow got control of that somehow there's things we can't see that are affecting things we can see, and if we somehow could tap into that, figure out how that works, get hold of that magic, I could be really lazy. I just move things by thinking about it. My very first career, my very first job, I had 35 jobs by the time I was 35, by the way. So if any of you are worried whether or not you got the right thing, you got plenty of time. My very first paid job, age 5, magician. I did magic tricks, so I did magic shows. Because to me, I was fascinated. There's got to be something out there we get our self-hold of. So I've always been fascinated by models. I got into college, I thought I was going to study philosophy, but it wound up getting bored because the philosophers all seemed to prove their original hypothesis using their original hypothesis. And well, that didn't go anywhere. Except what was fascinating was why did they use that hypothesis, but another philosopher at another time used another one. And then I read Spengler's Decline of the West, and I got into history of thought. So I was fascinated by, we didn't call it paradigms back then, I was in the 60s, which is like, wow, fascinating. That the way we think affects everything we do. I mean, to Phil's point this morning, I'm sure, absolutely. Anyway, so out of all that, and I finally, got into graduate school, American History of Thought, by the way, Berkeley, 1968. That's in history books, at least in the US now. Heady times to be there. But I discovered finally I wanted to find my own enlightenment and connection to that instead of reading about people who had theirs. So I dropped out, wound up getting involved in the martial arts. I'd read Suzuki and Watts and all the Zen stuff by the time I was in high school. And I was fascinated by that. I had a friend who offered to teach me karate. I thought, well, that'd be interesting to see how does that affect it. And boy, there's a real good testing ground for how consciousness affects perception and performance. The thought you have in your mind when you walk up to put your hand through 6 inches of wood is really important. That you don't have 2,000 unprocessed emails on your mind. And that you don't go, God, that'll really hurt. You see yourself through, fast, easy, done. You have to see that first. Otherwise, it'll never happen. So I learned way back there that somehow what we are holding in our consciousness has a lot of power and a lot of effect to those things. So out of my profound laziness, and by the way, I think passion's frankly overrated. You hear passion from people who have it, but they didn't go out to be passionate. They just got engaged in such a way that people look at them and say, well, gee, I guess that's really a passionate thing. I think real change happens by the sometimes boring little things you do that are the right things to do that you start doing in a consistent way that then create a profound effect once you do those. So I was lazy. I wake up thinking, how much easier can I get from here to there? See, by the way, if you know where you're going and what you're doing, efficiency and style are your only improvement opportunities. I wake up in the morning thinking, how much easier can I do anything that I'm doing? I thought everybody thought that way. Or with how much style. I wake up and say, what's the easiest way to get out of this room? Now, I may not go that way. I might decide I want to style, come over here or slow down or whatever. But at least I know, in case I want to get there with as little effort as possible, how to do that. And by the way, you always teach what you need to learn the most. And I had a kind of life out here that looked in control, but by the way, if you're too in control, you're out of control because you now have, I didn't know who I was. So I had a life that was sort of structured out here very well and looked successful, but inside of me, I didn't know what the hell I was going on or what I wanted to do or where I was going. So I was really at a very deep level feeling like I didn't have my life under control nor appropriately focused. What do I do with all that? And I lived with that and agonized over that for a good 30 plus years, dealing with that. And first of all, needed work. I wasn't born rich, so I needed, and then meaningful work. I wanted to work with people that had somehow that connected to the spiritual values that I had, but that also just helped people wherever they were, that improved their condition and their life. Frankly, I just scratched a lot of itches. And I've heard all you folks that have talked have said, I just somehow wanted to do that, or I needed to do that, or I felt pulled to do that. So that's what I did. By the way, I listened to smart friends. And not all the time, but every once in a while I go, I need help. And I was smart enough to get a bunch of smart people who loved me and my work and what I was doing and bring them together and be real honest and go, help, what do I do? And I took a lot of long walks off short piers. Kind of at the right time, not consistently, but at the right moment. That's kind of what I did. So that's a strange compilation of things, but again, I'm kind of out of my comfort zone and sharing that with you. Happy to fill in any of the blanks, any of you want to hear about more of that anywhere along the line. The wow stuff, what's really cool is that my work now, I get to help people who are doing good work do more with less. And that is now my passion, if you will. So we give away as much work as we can afford to. We help people who are doing good work. That's why anything I can share with any of you doing great work, I can help the do folks and whatever you guys are doing. There's great stuff. And that's, that really turns me on. Because I wanted to be doing meaningful work, and who knew that my meaningful work was to help people doing meaningful work do it better and do it easier. And to change the world's thinking for the better. That's what turns me on, is I watch people use this simple stuff, but it changes how, we don't seem to be born doing this. I don't know, did any of you hop out of the womb going, hi, what are we trying to accomplish? What's the next step? Yours or mine? No, these are learned behaviors. And you can either do them or not do them. Depends on how important clear space is to you. Little do. My little do is to share with as many of you in as many ways, kind of ongoing. I can't stop. Ask my wife, Catherine, who's been my right hand for many, many, many years there, that essentially, and this is the challenge to you. Hey, folks, start to pay attention to what has your attention. You don't have to go very far to know which itch you need to scratch next. You just have to listen inside to and you don't have to have a reason for it. Just go scratch that itch and then find out the other itch that then will start to show up. But you won't see the other one until you scratch the first one. Don't have to have it perfect. And when you've got mom on a list, decide the outcome desired and the action required. Those are the two key elements. So think about something that's on your mind here, even that's happening here at the conference and the lectures, that has started to ring your bell. And sooner than later, sit down and say, okay, what am I now committed to finish about any of that? And it might just be research, look into. I want to explore that. Good, now you got a project. What's the next step? And make those determinations sometime soon. And free up your psyche. Your psyche is not to be your system. That's the biggest problem we have on the planet right now with smart, sophisticated, responsible people, is that they're still trying to use their psyche as their system. But the one thing that's not on their mind is their calendar. It's the one system, their diary. It's the one system they actually trust, where they just took stuff. They said, this is the thing. This is where to park it. Now my psyche is freed from that. Just do that with the rest of your life. So again, it's a principle underlying all of these. And that's all you need to do. What do I need to do next to help that? To help get the load off the psyche, to help you get more clear space. And any of these ideas you try and they work, share them with other people. You don't learn anything until you teach it. The big do? The big do is the little do done. These little do's, and you could have fooled me, but over now 30 years and hundreds of thousands of people, I've worked with this material to watch some of the most amazing transformations with people start to get stuff out of their head, decide outcome and action when it shows up instead of when it blows up, organize this trusted thing so their psyche starts to have more creative space to make creative decisions and be creative and to hang with their kids instead of be their Blackberries, to be able to get that kind of free space. That's the big do, as far as I'm concerned. Now, the truth is, I got a big do, which is to make this available to the planet for everybody that can use it. One of my most inspiring things was to do a workshop for a town in Western Massachusetts. And they were into complaining mode, but after that workshop, they started to be in division mode, simply because they got control of their farms, their houses, their things, and it worked. By the way, folks, getting things done is not about getting things done. This is a big aha. It's really about getting free and clear inside of you to start to follow the voice that's always been there and being appropriately engaged. The reason getting things done became such a great model to work with that, how do we really truly access who we are and what we're here to do, is because I think we're all here to get things done. This is the doing planet. This is the doing material level. And if you want to just be, good luck. At some point you will still have to do, but I guarantee you the people that I know that are most into being are high doers on this level. So if we can find an appropriate model to engage with how we get things done, that's then the process that'll open it up for much bigger space. Thanks.